Hi everyone, my name is Steph. This is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel and welcome to part 1 of my Trans Rights Readathon and Queer Lit Readathon. The Trans Rights Readathon was happening from the 20th until the 26th of March and the Queer Lit Readathon was happening over the weekend period. Now I'm filming this video on Saturday, so I have done 5 days of the Trans Rights Readathon, and this weekend I have a few other books that do fit into the Trans Rights Readathon, but I also have a couple of other books that don't necessarily fit under that umbrella, but fit under the Queer Lit umbrella. So I'm going to do a vlog that's going to come out on Tuesday that's going to wrap up this weekend, and I'll talk about the books in there. So there will be some books that still fit into the Trans Rights Readathon and some books that fit into the Queer Lit Readathon. It's honestly just been so delightful to prioritize and pick up these books and also to find new books, because some of the titles that I've picked up in the last week have been books that I've seen other people reading during the week and have been able to grab them on Kindle Unlimited and read them straight away, which has been amazing because there have been so many recommendations. It is incredible, and now I have, a list of books that I can continue to read throughout the year. So that was a really long intro. Now this is my reading week from the 20th until the 24th of March. I have read 10 things so far. I have enjoyed all of them. So the first book that I read was For the Love of April French by Penny Ames. Now I have had this book sitting on my Kindle for ages, so it was nice to just absolutely prioritize this, and I really wanted to make sure that I read it first because it was great and I've been sitting on it for so long. So this is about Dennis Martin, who meets April French, who is a trans woman, at a kink club / bar when he moves to Austin, and it's initially a much quieter scene than he's expecting, and the two of them hit it off. But what starts as no strings sex arrangement between the two of them quickly becomes more complex than that, as there are real feelings involved, but April is very concerned about protecting herself because quite often sort of the stopping ground for people in the scene, and once they get established they move on to other people, and so she doesn't want to have her heart broken, so she kind of keeps Dennis at arm's length. And it's really about, well, how do these two communicate and how do they eventually establish a relationship that is healthy and safe for both of them. And it was really great. This book did some really cool things with timelines and point of view that I really quite liked, because the first part of the book we alternate perspectives, and then in the second part of the book we get April's perspective on events for a period of time, and then we flip to Dennis's perspective and we go through the same events but from his perspective, and we see how, because they're not necessarily effectively communicating at this point, where the lines are and where miscommunication happens and why it happens, rather than just going, oh well, it's just because the other person's not listening. And I really liked that. I didn't think that I would, because when we first switched back to Dennis's perspective I was like, oh no, I'm gonna have to live through the entire thing that I've just read again. But it wasn't like that at all, and it was very, very clever in the way that it was done. I also really like this because for all that there is kink in this book and April and Dennis explore a dom-sub relationship, it's also very soft and fluffy and just warm and cozy. It's a very precious little book in that regard, because it's absolutely steamy, but it's also very wholesome. And April is very much the mum friend of the group, and everyone looks to her for support. And Dennis does take on sort of that dad role eventually. And I think I probably should have prefaced this entire video with saying a lot of these characters are dealing with transphobia, microaggressions, whatnot through the book. So there are those in here, but mostly it's a celebration of this relationship and the joy that these characters find. And I think that's the beauty of all the books that I read this week, is that they all center trans joy, which was amazing. So then I read Mooncakes by Suzanne Walker. This is a graphic novel. This is about a teen witch and a genderqueer werewolf who have to work together to rid the forest of a very powerful demon. And this demon has ties to the werewolf's magic, and it was just such a sweet story, and it just had very cozy vibes to it. I really enjoyed it. It's a gorgeous book of love and friendship and family. I loved that our heroine lived with her 2 grandmothers who are in a relationship, so there is a sapphic relationship on page, and it also deals with loss of family because the heroine lost her parents, but due to their magic she is visited by their ghosts all the time, and they're conscious and sentient and they interact, and there's a lot in there about being tied to your family but also having the courage to find your own path. So it was just a really lovely little graphic novel. I don't know if there are more of them, so I should probably check that out. I also read Cinder Ella by St. Lynn. This is a Black Cinderella retelling with a trans heroine. Ella lives with her stepmother and her stepsisters, and it very much follows that Cinderella arc where they are absolutely horrible to her and misgender her intentionally. But one day while she's out in the garden, the princess visits to drop off an invitation to a ball that she has to host because her family has decided that the princess needs to settle down, and she very blatantly states, I don't really care if it's a boy or a girl who I end up falling for, but here's the invitation to the ball. And we hit all of the Cinderella beats up until the end of the ball. There is some magic involved, which was very fun, but after the ball, Ella is thrown out and she has to really establish a life for herself. And I really like that element because suddenly she's on her own, she's having to make friends, she's having to essentially establish a business, and then you get her reuniting with the princess. The only thing I would say about this one is that I kind of wish it had an extra chapter because it ended really abruptly, but I think one more chapter and you could have just sort of rounded it out and almost like an epilogue of, you know, here's what happened. I don't always necessarily need those, but this book felt like that it needed it to me personally. I also read a short story by Chace Verity called Comfort. This is basically a slice of life between two characters who had a one-night stand 6 years earlier. So Sorrel was 19 and Eileen was 39, and they had this one-night stand interaction at a bar. But ever since then, Sorrel has not been able to stop thinking about Eileen. And then they reconnect 6 years later and bond over furniture shopping. So it's a super slice of life. And there are some very entertaining scenes in furniture shops, some very steamy scenes in furniture shops. And this book has a trans woman and non-binary representation. It's super short. I think it's less than 40 pages long. I also read the first volume of Boys Run the Riot, which is a manga series, and this was utterly delightful. Ryu, who is the main character of the story, is a trans boy who knows that he is transgender, but the rest of the world is trying to constantly remind him that he was born a girl. And this is really frustrating for him because all he wants to do is dress in his favourite clothes that are comfortable and not have anyone comment on it. Things change when a new boy arrives at the school. His name is Jin, and Ryu initially mistakes him for the stereotypical bully because that's kind of the perception that this kid has around him, but rapidly realises that you can't judge someone by what they look like because they share a passion for the same clothing. And Jin proposes that they start their own clothing label or clothing brand, which is the majority of the second part of the first volume. And I just loved the way that this friendship really gave Ryu someone to confide in, someone who doesn't judge him for who he is, and how they sort of embark on this enterprise together. So I will definitely be continuing this manga at some point, probably in April for 30 and 30. Then I think my favourite read for this readathon was Hearthorn Havoc by Freydis Moon. This is another novella. I could have read an entire novel length of these two characters. This is a ghostly gothic queer novella, and we have Colin, who is a transgender exorcist who takes a job to rid Bishop's house of some malevolent spirits. And when he gets to the house, Bishop is renovating, and in order to get a sense for the spirits, Colin has to live in the house for a period of time. And so these two are sharing relatively close quarters. And Colin rapidly realizes that the malevolent spirit is a particular type of demon who is tied to Bishop in some way, but Bishop isn't sharing how or why that might be the case. And Colin really begins to realize that there are some pretty big secrets in Bishop's past, which makes them fairly evenly matched because both of them have secrets. And I just love seeing their relationship develop alongside ridding this house of ghosts. Like, it was just great. There is a really awesome side character. I will say this one does lean into the horror side of things a little bit, so if you are not into that, maybe skip this one, but it was so beautifully written. Like, I just got to the end of it and wanted to start reading it again. And now I just want to read everything by this author because their writing is wonderful. So it will surprise no one that the very next day I read another book by the same author, because how could I not? And the one that I picked up was Exodus 23. I am going to preface this before I talk about the book. This is a monster romance with religious eroticism in it. So if that is going to bother you, definitely skip this one. But it is about a trans man called Diego who has kind of made one too many bad choices, and his last choice ended up with him in jail overnight, and now he has to do community service, and his mother has signed him up to help restore a church to its former glory, sort of as community service. When he arrives at this very rundown church, he meets Ariel, who is the person in charge of the restoration. But what quickly becomes apparent is that Ariel may not be human, and Diego has to figure out exactly who and what Ariel is, why he is so invested in restoring this church. There are some incredibly steamy scenes, including one in front of an altar. This was nothing like what I expected and everything that I wanted. The way that I relate to religion, full disclosure, I was raised Catholic, I went through Catholic school, so I spent a lot of time learning about Catholicism. I'm not practicing, I don't consider myself particularly religious, but I love unpacking religious things. So for me, this was great because this really delved into faith and belief and whatnot. And I loved it. I loved every second of it. So the next book that I read was Genderqueer by Maia Kobabe. This is a graphic autobiography of the author's life as they are non-binary and asexual. Maia describes coming out, moving through their life, and the self-doubt and the self-discovery that they go through. So it was a really, really wonderful read. There are tons of book recommendations in here for people who might want to explore more. So it's a good one for that if you are looking for more information. The one thing I will say is that Maia talks about a relationship to the HP franchise. So just be aware of that going into it, because it was closely linked to Maia's discovery of themselves as a reader. So just keep that in mind when you're reading if that's going to be triggering for you. Then I read Cheer Up, Love and Pom-Poms by Crystal Fraise, which is a really gorgeous young adult sapphic graphic novel with a trans heroine. It is about Annie, who is an academically inclined, very antisocial individual who is basically told that she needs to join a club or something in order to look good on her college applications. And so her mother insists that she try out for the cheerleading team. And when she does, she discovers that her former friend BB has been nominated as the captain of the squad for this year. BB is trans and is the only trans member on their cheerleading squad, and often has to deal with microaggressions that her friends don't even realize that they are displaying. But she doesn't really want to cause waves, and so she kind of lets a lot of it slide until Annie points out that it's not okay and actually stands up for her and helps her to stand up for herself. And the other thing in this book that could be triggering for people is that her parents, while trying to protect her, are actually holding her transition hostage and insisting that she gets good grades or they won't support it anymore. And that does get addressed in the story. But yeah, for a while it is in the story, so just be aware of that going into it. But I loved this. Annie and BB reconnecting and rekindling their friendship and then addressing their feelings for one another was just really gorgeous. I don't know if this is a series or a standalone. I need to really look into that. I would 100% read more with these characters because I absolutely love them. Oh, the other thing that I should say, there are some fat shaming comments in the book. However, the really cool thing about this cheerleading squad is that it has a range of people with different body types and shapes in the team, which was really great to see on page. And then the last book that I read was Iron Widow by Xiran Zhao. And this was another book that I've been sleeping on, clearly, because I've owned this for years. But I think because I've sort of been out of my young adult reading phase, I didn't pick it up. I remember that I purchased this book because it was pitched as Pacific Rim meets The Handmaid's Tale, and it is 100% that. You have this sci-fi world where humans pilot these giant mecha robots called chrysalises. And to pilot a chrysalis, you need a male pilot and you need a female concubine who basically lends life energy or chi to sustain this robot in battle. And quite often this process kills the woman. So our heroine in the story, Zetian, basically becomes overcome with the need for revenge when her older sister dies in a battle as a result of this. And she's determined to become the concubine of the pilot who killed her sister and to kill him. What starts off as this revenge plot quickly turns into something else as she begins to survive everything that this male-dominated, patriarchy-dominated world throws at her. And I believe this is a retelling of the story of the first female emperor of China. Zetian becomes, after achieving her goal, becomes the co-pilot of another chrysalis with Xiran, who is a criminal and a convict, but is one of the most powerful chrysalis pilots in this world. She is the only one who is able to survive piloting with him. I haven't explained this well, but it's kind of really complex. You kind of have to read it. They have to essentially mind meld while in battle in order to effectively control the chrysalis. But Zetian fights every step of the way because she wants to be in control. She doesn't want to be subservient. She does not want to be perceived to be a weak woman. She doesn't care about anyone else's perceptions of her. She's determined to do what it takes to survive. And what follows is this very cool story as Zetian and Xiran are able to form an alliance. And she also has the help of her childhood friend Yizzy as he finds a way to sort of become connected to these two pilots. And they end up in this polyam relationship, which is great. And all three of them are determined to see women stop being killed for the sake of piloting these giant robots in a battle against aliens. So I thoroughly love this. I know that was a really terrible explanation of the book because it's probably confused everyone, but it was great. And I would really like the sequel because I didn't realize this was getting a sequel because the ending got me and I want to know more. Now I have to wait until next year for this sequel. The life of a bookworm. All right, so those are the books that I have read so far for the Trans Rights Readathon. The other thing that I forgot to mention at this video, I have donated $100 to Transgender Victoria. I'll put a screenshot of my donation thing on the screen for you. They are doing really excellent work here in Victoria, so I wanted to make sure that I put in some money to support them on behalf of the Trans Rights Readathon. In the comments, I would love to know if you have read any of these books or if you are planning on picking any of them up. Alternatively, feel free to share something that you have been reading and enjoying in the last week. So I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.